So thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's great to have you all with us tonight. As we gather today, we're all on Indigenous lands. I'm at my house on the banks of the Pemigewasset, an important watershed for the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. To help you learn more about the Indigenous histories of your place, we've put a link in the chat to native-land.ca, as well as the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec to learn more about Abenaki peoples of northern New England. This year, our Mountain Voices series explores winter in the White Mountains, and it's tied to our winter exhibition, Silent Shifts, Evolving Winters in the White Mountains, which is on view through March 29th. And as you may have heard Blake and I just talking about, it's about the joys of winter. So this is a great winter to come see the exhibition, see historical ways to get out in winter, as well as make sure to get out yourselves this winter. And so tonight we're joined by Blake Keogh. His talk, Melting Snow, Backcountry Skiing, Mental Health, and Climate Change on the East Coast, brings together his passion for winter recreation and his pursuit of a master's degree in clinical mental health. Please join me in welcoming Blake.
Thank you so much, Megan. And yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Not sure how many folks could hear when you got into the room, but Megan and I were just talking about just how wonderful it's been to experience again what, quite frankly, feels like a real winter. It's been cold and snowy and consistently so on both ends. And it's just, yeah, it is been really, really, really incredible to just be back in that rhythm of moving in and around snow constantly, day in and day out. Although I will say shoveling, I'd forgotten what it's like to shovel the driveway pretty much every other day. So that's been a little bit of a wake-up call reminder. Um, Before I get going here with slides, um, I think the best way to start would be if everybody could just take a moment, wherever you are, and either look at a spot on the wall or on the ground and bring to your mind a place in nature that is of importance to you. Maybe that's a memory, maybe that's, yeah, memory of a trip or a particular tree or trail or ski adventure or sledding adventure, whatever it is. But just take a second to bring that place to mind in as much clarity as possible. And I'll let the awkward pause go for about 20 seconds. Um, in a former life, I was a high school psychology teacher, and my first few years, I struggled with the long pauses when I would ask students questions, but I think I've gotten a little better at them. Learned many things as a high school teacher. Yeah, tonight we're gonna cover, I'll share a bit of my story. I'm gonna skip through or jump over a lot of parts of it because we only have an hour. But my, ultimate goal in sharing this time with you all is to dive more into the nuance of really how spending time in nature, but particularly winter and particularly through skiing, backcountry skiing, has helped shape me as a person and my relationships with other people, and also created a deep relationship with the mountains and ocean to a degree, but mountains in particular, that I'll be honest, I never really imagined growing up. And that relationship really drives most anything that I do, whether it's through, pursuing a degree in mental health or teaching avalanche courses. I work for Synnott Mountain Guides, guiding, advanced apologies. I actually just finished up a day of guiding, and so Um, Thus the apparel. Normally I would try to dress up a little more. I literally just got off the mountain. So, but yeah, that relationship has informed everything. And I'm so incredibly grateful for it. And I'm so grateful to be able to share that with you all tonight. So we'll have about, I'm going to try and keep it to 40 minutes of sharing a presentation with you all. I've done my best to keep most of the slides TED Talk-esque, meaning lots of visuals, not many words. Um, but I do think that words and definitions have value and data as well. So there are some slides that are a little text heavy. So advanced apologies for those of you who aren't a huge fan of reading a lot of text on slides, but I think some of the information there is really, really important and helps give a little bit of depth to yeah, into what we're going to cover. I always remind my students that both stories and data are important, but it's also important that we don't confuse the two. So I'll be pretty explicit if it's my own personal experience or this is something that we're experiencing more broadly that we understand through research. So with that, we'll get going here. Hopefully, so I haven't been in a Zoom meeting. It's like, here we go, share. Okay, great. Okay, so as I just mentioned, I have the distinct pleasure of working for Synnott Mountain Guides as an AIARE course leader, and AIARE is the American Institute of Avalanche Research and Education. Yeah, as a course leader as well as a ski guide. Once the snow melts, I go back home and try and put life back together, and working incredibly hard to finally finish a second master's degree. I earned a master's in experiential education with a focus, my research focus primarily on decision making in complex and dynamic environments. And you can guess which complex and dynamic environment I chose to study. Um, a lot of people thought it was an excuse to go skiing, but I think I became a worse skier that year of data gathering on the hill. I did not get to go up high all that often, but I enjoyed the process. And yeah, right now finishing up a degree in clinical mental health, which is a whole separate story, but something that I never imagined doing. And then the last role that I get to fulfill in life is that as an athlete, I get to ski for a number of brands and companies. Again, an incredible gift and privilege that I never imagined having. And certainly as an older athlete, I am holding on to that that dream as long as possible. Thank you, water, sleep, and yoga. We'll see how long it lets me yeah, continue living the dream, so to speak. Let's see if I can click through here. So here's our outline. I'll do a quick intro, background, an overview of mental health, and that's particularly through my personal lens. So if, you know, it doesn't resonate immediately, hopefully find other ways that I might connect with it. An overview of climate change. I've made the mistake in some presentations in the past of assuming that folks are familiar with what's happening here on the East Coast, but that isn't always true. So I'll go over in big, broad strokes some of the changes that we're experiencing and how that's impacting our communities, and then really try and tie it together, the intersection of climate change and mental health, um, and then how that's impacting our decisions, day to day as we head up the mountain with guests and clients and students, and then some concluding thoughts. And I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have. I think that's honestly usually the most enjoyable part. So we'll get going. Um, I'm not sure if any of you have ever skied at this wonderful, wonderful mountain, all 1,800 feet of it. But Butternut was the mountain that, quote unquote, mountain that I got to learn how to ski on. I was very lucky. My aunt and my mom took me skiing for the first time when I was about 4. And yeah, it's hard to overstate how important these types of hills and mountains are to our communities. It's probably a whole separate presentation on seeing the loss of some of these places or watching them struggle to stay open for a variety of different reasons. Um, but as I'm sure as many of you know, these types of ski hills were integral to medium and small communities throughout the East Coast for so long. Many of them just run by, towns and municipal organizations. very different than how we experience ski hills today. And so, for a number of reasons, I'm grateful to have learned how to ski quite early. It's a wonderful way to move through the world, move through the mountains, but particularly so in a community or environment like this. This actually looks like this is a newer map from Butternut. I don't remember that many runs being there, but maybe, maybe that's just me getting older. And yeah, and that's me early on. Early days of sliding downhill. I actually don't remember these photos or this particular time skiing. What I do remember is the drive home. And I remember us being stuck in traffic and watching snow fall out the window and watching it, the brake lights and tail lights from cars kind of illuminating the snow as it fell. And kind of again, as Megan and I were talking about earlier before we started, there were just so many ways to enjoy and appreciate being in nature, but particularly being in nature in the winter. And while skiing, in a vacuum in and of itself is really, really fun. Uh, what it puts us into contact with and who it puts us into community with is just as, if not even more important. So thank you so much, Aunt Jill, and to my mom for forcing me into boots that were really painful very, very early on. We certainly wouldn't be here chatting tonight if it weren't for them for many reasons. Um, and then we're skipping over a lot here, as I mentioned, but this is a photo. Thank you, Brendan Wiltz, from the Adirondacks. I actually lost, I wouldn't say I lost contact, but certainly, throughout high school and then early days of college, um, you know, whether it was fishing or skiing or any other activities, those other roles kind of took over. And it was actually the head of the Hamilton Outing Club. I remember walking across campus one day, and I actually didn't even know him that well. And he just asked me, he's like, "Do you want a job?" And first question was, "Does it pay any money?" He said, "Not really." But that was kind of a reintroduction to leading AIARE courses and taking folks out into the
Yeah.
mountain skis. And yeah, incredibly grateful for Andrew Chillings and Hamilton for, basically reviving that part of my life. Similar to both my aunt and my mom, I don't know if we'd be here having this conversation if it weren't for Andrew. So some pivotal folks along the way. Um, and I'm not sure if anybody has ever been to the North Cascades, but if you have, you probably recognize this photo. That's the Liberty Bell and early winter spires off of Highway 20. Um, and yeah, it was the first time, um, yeah, the first time I went backcountry skiing. If you look at those are the early winter spires on the left-hand side there. And as you follow the ridge over, just to the left, there's a little notch in there that's hidden in the shadow that drops into that big face. And my friend John, yeah, took me backcountry skiing for the first time on that face. We took a little kind of warm-up lap on the other side of that ridge. And I was actually joking with the person I was skiing with today. It was, I knew so little at the time. I knew how to ski, but I'd never, put skins on my skis. I'd never hiked uphill that way. And, yours truly forgot to lock their heels down on their first turn and doubly checked it. I didn't realize there was a walk mode in my boots. And so I gave myself really, really bad blisters. But it really, truly only took one day and one ski to have a life-changing experience. This is my early 20s, and that line in particular right there that I and we are staring at right now, just to the left of the spires, is, yeah, really put in motion a career that I never, ever, ever could have expected. And to just kind of like put a stamp on that, when I initially graduated college, I was living in New York City, worked for a number of different publications, and yeah, it was a very, very different life. So I'm incredibly grateful to John and Megan who took me, yeah, backcountry skiing for the first time. And yeah, it'd actually be great. I haven't seen them in so many years. It'd be great to see them sometime soon and thank them again in person. Oh, and if you ever have the chance to go skiing, climbing, etc., up here, it is amazing, amazing, amazing part of the world. Certainly near and dear to my heart. So yeah, so here's one of the more text heavy slides. I one of the things I didn't really understand until much later, and again, I think one of the things I hope to communicate or convey in tonight's conversation or presentation is that it's a lot more than skiing, and I didn't understand that until I moved to Seattle. And see, moving to Seattle was just by chance. I called it College 2.0, and some of the lessons learned are as follows. That in that particular community, being a good skier athlete just wasn't enough for a variety of reasons. One, there were a lot of skiers, a lot of athletes that are just way, way better than me, certainly. So there's a large community of them, but there was this undertone that as much as sliding downhill and turning skis mattered, conversations would change pretty quickly to, you know, how are we dealing with climate change? How are we dealing with concerns or problems in our neighborhood? It was almost as though skiing was the vehicle to get to discuss and attend to more important parts of life. And I'm not sure if that's true everywhere, but it was definitely true in Seattle in the early 2000s. And so again, those second bullet points were really important. What do you bring to your community? Certainly, how does your time or how does our time in the mountains expand our understanding of ourselves and others? That was a big one. Again, a lot of this was kind of unsaid, but just assumed, it's just part of our day-to-day conversations. And skiing really should connect you. And obviously, it's a lot easier in Seattle, but that skiing should connect us with other ideas, cultures, ecosystems, perspectives, music and art. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. And Seattle, for anybody who's lived there, but especially in there, it's been a while since I've lived there, but in the early 2000s, it was this daily connection with the outdoors. Whether it was hiking or running or cycling, I actually didn't own a vehicle at that point. I would just ride to work every day. So really good infrastructure there to just ride your bike everywhere. Um, yeah, it was a wonderful experience. And then the last one that I thought was really important, and this is perhaps a byproduct of my, close friend group, but skiing was really understood as an art, and that art could be expressed in a wide variety of different ways. But at its core, art, I'm borrowing this quote from Cesar Cruz, but should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And we can discuss that, in a larger group later on. But that's how I saw skiing at the time and continue to see it. And certainly that first piece that, comfort the disturbed. Disturbed is a bit of a heavy word. I might replace it with something else, but that would be a little too much hubris and a little too much ego. Who am I to correct somebody else's quote? But it's certainly the connection with mental health. And we'll dive into that in a little bit. But incredibly grateful for my time spent in Seattle and in the Cascades, and strongly recommend going if you haven't been before. Eventually, though, I did return home. Kind of a common story, but and I'll be honest, I when I returned home again, like I said, I came back and started teaching, and I thought that part of my life and certainly career was well over. And in fact, the opposite was true. If anything, it really escalated starting around 2010, 2011, and now have the wonderful opportunity to spend the vast majority of my time, here in the White Mountains, particularly on Mount Washington, Agiokachuk, um, and yeah, experiencing the sometimes good snow that we have. Um, Typically cold, windy, as many of you know, days up there, but it has become, yeah, home away from home. My actual home is in South Portland, Maine. And yeah, now we have days like this, which um, just so incredibly grateful for that every once in a while you have soft snow from top to bottom on a line, and you get to share it with other people, which is pretty amazing. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I do have another passion and love. Although this is one I arrived at not until my early mid 20s. Thus, like many things in life, I feel like I'm always trying to catch up with my friends. But the only thing that I feel is close to the experience of turning skis downhill, and more important actually than turning a ski, um, creating a really rich connection with water, if I were to, I guess, in its most reductionist, way of thinking, but that's surfing. And so, yeah, when the snow melts up here, I go back home and trade in this suit, which again, I apologize, but just got off the mountain, but trade in this suit for a wetsuit, and when the ocean allows, get to, yeah, experience nature in a very similar but also very different way, and just incredibly grateful for that as well. And unfortunately, we've seen some changes in the ocean that we'll go over in a little bit. It's probably the greatest understatement I'll make all night. But yeah, we've seen some incredibly not so wonderful changes in the ocean, from a temperature standpoint in particular. And probably the most important piece is that this career has, as I mentioned a few times, just put me in touch with other people and professionals and athletes that as a little kid, it wasn't, I mean, it was a dream to be an athlete and guide. It was a dream to, I don't even, those are really specific words. It was more just a dream to be in the mountains. And never in a million years did I think that I would, call folks who are on the screen friends, or be able to go on adventures with them. And yeah, I just hope that whether, it's skiing, snowboarding, sledding, walking through snow, ice fishing, whatever it might be, that it puts you into community, because that is definitely one of the most, if not the most important part of all of this. And there's actually some local heroes in this photo you might recognize. Dr. Burkowski right here in the middle. She is a professor at UNH and also part of the Protect Our Winters Climate Alliance. Certainly one of the smartest people I know, and also one of the kindest. And so it's been wonderful getting to know Dr. Burkowski, or Liz. And then over here, you may not recognize this local hero, because this was when he was wearing a different outfit when he was competing for the US ski team. That's Troy Murphy. Goes by his alter ego or personality, Donnie Pelletier. Some folks forget that yeah, he was a very, very accomplished skier. You have to be good to ski the way that he does. Um, so yeah, so now we'll jump back into creating that connection, tying it back to mental health. One of the things that I did not know growing up was that pretty profound ADHD. And so what I was doing, if let's see if I can go back a few slides, in moments like this and moments like this, through what we now understand through really strong research, was, essentially using nature as a way of medicating myself. I was not a great student, particularly in middle school and early high school. I really, really struggled on a number of levels, but particularly, ironically, doing the thing I'm doing right now, which is listening to somebody talk at me for 40 minutes. I would get very easily distracted, to put it mildly. But it's one of the reasons that I know I'm going to say it 1,000 times tonight, but I'm so grateful for being in the mountains and being in the ocean, because it really helped me understand myself and my brain in ways that I wouldn't have without those experiences. And again, I think sometimes we say that with just like broad strokes, but I wanted to share some important data information, um, showing that green outdoor spaces, resulted in a reduction. This particular study was done on children. We don't actually have a lot done for adults yet, especially the way that this particular study was run, but seeing a really profound reduction in symptoms, ADHD symptoms, and then seeing that reduction then carry over into, or extend out into, experiences that weren't, right in the moment, or like essentially when you would return home or return to the classroom, we'd see those benefits as well. This one is really important. Workers with ADHD indicate that stimulating workplace environments with challenge, novelty, multitasking, fast-paced activities. We got to ski in Tuckerman Ravine today. You can see, pretty easy the connection here. Physical labor, active learning, communal quiet spaces, and personal autonomy were an especially good fit. And again, I didn't know any of this when all of this career started. It just happened by chance. And again, something I'm will forever be grateful for. And then the last one It's reported that folks with ADHD show immense creativity and thinking in non-traditional solutions, which we have to do every day, whether it's on the hill or off the hill. And I think increasingly is an important, is an important part of being a good community member, and aggregating knowledge across different fields. I feel like that's something that my brain just latches onto pretty quickly. And the last piece is also important, I think, especially as ADHD, or neurodivergence in general, but ADHD specifically, as we become more attuned to it and have greater understanding of it. Sometimes there's a tendency, and perhaps this is in my own community, but to almost over celebrate and forget that some of these diagnoses are highly comorbid and strongly correlated with premature mortality. So I'd say one of the things that's always been my goal is to help folks through a variety of different means. And, for tonight's purposes, getting out in nature specifically, um, to be exposed to these environments, and hopefully help them better understand how their brains work, and by creating greater connections with the natural world and the mountains and the ocean. So, that was all kind of happening behind the scenes as I carried my skis uphill day in and day out and then slid back down. I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew that it, quote unquote, felt really good, and that in those spaces, kind of the chaos that was my brain, all of a sudden all the puzzle pieces fit together for like 6 or 7 hours of the day, and it was a really, really good feeling. These photos are hot off the press. This is actually from today. This is from about 4 or 5 hours ago. Again, up on Mount Washington, Agiopachuk. This was the guest and client that I got to work with today. This was their first time up on the mountain, and I don't know what they did to bring such good weather fortune into their lives, but I'm really glad they did, because it was a beautiful, beautiful day up there. Hardly any wind. Really, the sun was so warm that some of those more southerly aspects were actually, the snow was softening up and almost starting to feel a little spring-like, which was pretty incredible. But yeah, that's the connection, right? If you look at, I go back a slide, if you look at that second bullet point, not lost that all of a sudden this quote unquote workplace or environment felt very attractive to me. Um, and again, similarly in my own time, this is Katahdin on the left, and this is our local surf break on the right, that these spaces are, very much drawn to for a variety of reasons. This is actually an interesting one, so I'll go back a few slides. If you notice here, which is it? Yeah, the second bullet point again, communal and quiet spaces. So the other one I didn't understand was that, especially at the end of the day, after, particularly long work day, felt pretty drained and exhausted, not necessarily physically, but mentally and interpersonally, and really needed some quiet time by myself to reset and recharge the battery, so to speak. And so a few years ago, I renovated this old 1971 Scotty camper, and that is my home in the winter. And I think so much of skiing right now is these like really kind of intense experiences. And what I love about living in the camper is that you just engage with nature in a very different way, but also, very intimate way. You certainly get to know and understand the temperature very, very well living in that space. But that is the quiet home that I get to go back to most evenings. Oh, and then the photo on the right isn't that great. My apologies, but one of the most common questions I get is how do you heat it? And I just took a old ship stove and put it in there, so I get to I got a little wood burning stove in there that keeps everything pretty dry and pretty warm. That stove is meant for about 4 times the space than it's currently in, so it gets pretty toasty at night. Doesn't really last through the morning though, unfortunately. Um, so here we're gonna transition into some of the, I guess, less pleasant realities of our climate and how it's changing. And I'll try and be really explicit, because you're like, oh, hold on a second, Blake, you just gave us a, overview of your story and kind of walked us through some of the, symptoms and environments or symptoms of ADHD environments that work well. And now we're talking about climate change. What's the deal? And if I were to make it as explicit as possible, it's quite frank, to say nothing of the financial, losses that we experience when we don't have snow around. On a personal level, it's just incredibly sad and tragic to watch these changes occur. Um, and we will dive into that in a little bit, but that's kind of the connection between the two, is watching this place that you love in a way that's almost hard to describe all of a sudden change in ways that seem almost impossible to alter or fix. Um, becomes, a bit of a, to put it mildly, psychological burden. And here's some of the data. We'll look at both the Gulf of Maine, and then we'll look at some of the changes that are occurring here in our winter snowpack. But yeah, according to the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, the Gulf of Maine is warming at a rate that's roughly 3 to 4 times faster than other global oceans. So basically one of the fastest warming bodies of water in the world. And while it's, I guess, fun sometimes to be able to be in the water and surf, especially in the summer in board shorts, where it's not lost on anyone that that's not the norm for where we live. And, in that second bullet point there, we see that, some of the results we also see from a snowpack standpoint, and this is actually some of Dr. Burkowski's work, that the results show that the loss of cold and snow in northeastern North America will continue to accelerate, particularly in southerly and coastal areas of the region, which could see near total loss of snow and freezing temperatures by 2100, which again, I don't think it's lost on anyone in this room, the profound impact that has on our communities, as well as on us as individuals, seeing, that loss of snow over time, and quite frankly, not a very long period of time. And just for those of you who love graphs, if that's an easier way to understand what I just said, we have that, very, very simple two trend lines of the global oceans as well as the Gulf of Maine. And it's not looking so great for the Gulf of Maine. And then for the economists in the room, because it is an important important aspect of what we're doing. We got to pay bills. This is from just the state of Maine, but Maine's outdoor economy grew by roughly 16.5, 17% from 2021 to 2022. It accounts for roughly, I don't want to miss this number, but yeah, sorry, it generated 3.3 billion in 2022, which is roughly 4% of the state's gross domestic product. So, we have years like last year, we think about ski areas a lot, right? But I'll never forget driving. I was actually driving through Crawford Notch and got to about Attitash, which is roughly when I start to get cell service again. And I was listening to NPR, and I don't know why you need to know when that's where I get cell service, but it's been a long day. But I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about the impact it had on the ice fishing community and snowmobile communities. And I think that, when we talk about winter, maybe this is just the backcountry ski community or ski community in general, we lose sight of all of the other ways that people engage in winter, and all of the other ways that people make a career out of there being, quite frankly, snow and ice around. Yeah, so 4% of that gross domestic product is pretty important. In the last 3 or 4 years, the ice is incredible right now. I don't know if anybody's gone out and gone skating, but it's pretty amazing. I can't remember the last time I skated on natural ice, but it's what the family and I did this Christmas, and it was really, really special. But yeah, there's a lot of people who rely on that ice being around, and who rely on the snow being around. The outdoor recreation industry supported 32,000 jobs in 2022 in Maine, and which is a 7% increase over 2021. And among the standout areas of economic impact, according to the report, were boating, fishing, so 412 million, outdoor apparel and accessories, 178 million, and snow-related activities. There it is, $68 million. Snow-related activities saw the greatest increase over 2021 at roughly 36, and we'll just round up. So we'll give ourselves a pat on the back, 40%. And we've certainly seen that, in the avalanche education and instruction. Sorry, I'm just double checking the time to make sure I'm not going too far over. Education communities, when I first started, a busy season would be like 7 or 8 courses. And I mean, no joke, the last few years it would be 2025 plus, and that's just avalanche education. That's not including any guiding or any of the other work that we do. So it's seen a huge increase, which has been wonderful. It's been incredible to share these spaces and knowledge with folks. We just need snow to be around to, yeah, make it all happen. So, whoops, that's not gonna work. And yeah, and this is a bit more representative of the last few seasons, which, pretty dire and pretty grim. Snowmaking machines can only do so much. And again, that's, you have the luxury of having enough snowmaking equipment on, which obviously they do on bigger mountains. But if you go all the way back to that map of Butternut that I showed, as we know, there's a lot of community ski hills that don't have those financial or economic resources to make, that significant amount of snowmaking happen. And at some point, they shutter. So here's a more concrete tie between these two worlds and these two themes. So from the big picture, and we're seeing some great research on the mental health side of things, particularly clinical, looking at how folks are wrestling with, climate change and mental health. And so from the big picture, what we see is this existential dread or grief. This is becoming measurable. We know the environment will continue to be negatively impacted by human behavior, unless we see profound and systemic changes are really immediately enacted and adopted. I actually, when I was creating this presentation, I don't remember the word that I had there, but it was not immediately, but we are now at a place where it needs to be in the here and now. We really cannot wait any longer. And then kind of that mid-level experience, we see what's kind of become more popularly termed. Wow, that was a hard word. The popular term, um, climate anxiety, which we're seeing much more prominent, profound in Generation Z in particular, younger generations. But so those who directly depend upon the environment, particularly snow-based activities, we know that we're going to have to make substantial adjustments to careers and personal lives to continue to make this happen. It's not lost on anyone what the overall trend looks like, and that certainly, in some instances, not all, but can lead to, again, climate-related stress and or anxiety. And then we see the final piece, or the final one of the three natural disasters such as wildfires, hurricanes, floods, heat waves, all present immediate threats to anyone in their path. And that's where we again see, particularly, I'm thinking about the recent fires in California, high impact trauma. And it's actually, we're starting to see teams of mental health professionals being rapidly deployed to these areas, to be able to help folks manage, which is essentially a loss of, everything they've ever known, right? And so those are the big three ones. If we see how climate change impacts mental health, we have that existential dread and grief, that loss, chronic stress or anxiety, and then the acute high impact trauma, which, if unattended to, can in some instances lead to, post-traumatic stress. And there we go. And then here we have a newer term that's being coined, one that really resonates with me, which is solastalgia, which is the distress that is produced by environmental change impacting on people while they're directly connected to their home environment. This photo is a little stretched out, but if anyone, for those in the room who may not recognize this particular ridgeline, this is Boot Spur Ridge. Up on Mount Washington on your way up to Tuckerman Ravine, and it is, for me personally, I think one of my favorite, I don't know, just little pieces of land, not little, just pieces of landscape in our terrain, our area. There's something about those, three or four, big rock buttresses. They kind of emerge from the ridge and run up to the ridge line that just give it this really special alpine feel that, when you're up in those spaces, you kind of forget that you're actually still on the East Coast of New England. But yeah, solastalgia is that, I referenced last year when we're trying to teach courses and we don't have any snow. There's both the economic stress, but it's also just watching something that you love dissipate and go away. In a way that it obviously is very different than what the normal trend should be. And what's really nice is we finally have some good data on this. This is a really important study that was done in 2021. And I say important because, a lot of these sciences, but particularly in psychology, we have a really hard time for obvious reasons generating really large sample sizes. So to have a sample size of 10,000 that's cross-cultural um, is is really incredible. And what this particular study found, again, we're looking, so this survey was distributed to young people 16 to 25 years old in India, the United States, Nigeria, Portugal, UK, Finland, France, Brazil, the Philippines, and Australia. What we found is that Gen Z, in particular, that age group, ranked climate change phenomenally high on their list of concerns as they become adults. And I'll just read this quote to you. Climate anxiety and dissatisfaction with government responses are widespread in children and young people in countries across the world and impact their daily functioning. That's certainly different for a number of reasons than how I grew up as a middle schooler and high schooler. A perceived failure by governments to respond to the climate crisis is associated with increased distress. So it's not just the fact that we have a changing climate, it is the kind of double impact of not doing anything about it, which is, adds on to that distress and that anxiety. Not doing anything about it, probably that's unfair. I'm thinking of some friends who work in the both climate science as well as technology spaces, and they're working incredibly hard and doing amazing things, but certainly not at the scale or at the rate that we would all hope for. And then some final data for us, we have 59% extremely worried, 84% moderately worried. That's, I know just general percentages are not always incredibly accurate, but when you're in the 85 or 84, 85 to 90 percentile, that's, especially for a study that was done as well as this, that's pretty impactful. And that 83% of those surveyed felt that people have failed to take care of the planet, which I thought was, I don't know, when I read the study, I was like, wow, that's a really impactful way that hit home for me of just, you know, just kind of really saying it out loud of the work that we haven't done yet, so to speak. So this particular study is, yeah, pretty profound and pretty important. And then on the sharp end, what I've seen, early on, through practicum and beginning internship this summer, but the few clients I have worked with is that um, this anxiety, certainly puts us into states of either hyper arousal or hypoarousal. And as our world continues to become, I'll put it as mildly as possible, complex, we often see folks spending a lot of time in either of those states, and in that, ideal level of activation or window of tolerance where we're creative, we're resilient, and we're able to solve problems and work with others relatively well, even if something is brought up or even if something doesn't go our way, that window really begins to narrow. Again, not for everyone. I understand that I'm painting in incredibly broad strokes right now. But certainly when we think about, okay, trying to tie this all together, um, how does your time in the mountains inform, or how does our time in winter inform our understanding of climate change and therefore our understanding of ourselves? Obviously, if we see that loss, we experience solastalgia on a pretty profound and I would say pretty profoundly and clearly. That tends to move that needle into hypo arousal, and that window of tolerance begins to diminish. And so I think it's our work collectively as a community to help each other really find ways to stay active, engaged, and in that ideal, window of tolerance as much as we can, especially right now. So I'll kind of leave that there. Um, and one of, because I don't like, whether I'm teaching AIARE courses or guiding, I never like ending on that heavy a note. But we do have solutions, which is wonderful to see. And one of the ones, it's actually a great book about climate change and climate anxiety, written by two doctors, one of whom is a psychologist. And in that book, actually in the introduction of that book, there's this wonderful quote about the importance of deep resilience. So resilience is the process of skillfully navigating through crisis with the ability to psychologically bounce back from times of high distress. With climate change, the challenges are large in scale, long-term, and complex, and we need to enhance our capacities and reach deep for our most sustaining connections. I love that word within ourselves and perhaps most importantly, others. And some of the photos on the slide I actually don't share very often because they're not the fun ones that people love to see. But working left to right, this was trying to teach a avalanche education course last year. You will note the profound lack of snow in that photo, and it wasn't just this particular part of the trail. I can tell you right now, it looks very, very different. Those people on the left there are probably standing about 8 to 9 feet below what certain parts of the trail look like at this point. And there's so much snow up there; it's really amazing. And certainly, as guides and athletes, injuries happen, and that's just an x-ray from one of the many, many broken bones. Knock on wood, we like to avoid those. And then last but not least, this photo on the right was from a trip with one of my coworkers a few years ago, coworkers and friends. And it was a really hard day. And I just remember laying down in the tent, so cold, just so over it. And really not wanting to be there anymore and just thinking to myself, I'm like, Blake, you have to find one thing to do. You have to find one thing to just like get yourself motivated and move through this. And I just started reorganizing all of my gear in the tent down to the spare batteries that I'd brought with me. But I do think that when we talk about deep resilience, especially as we try and tackle such a large problem, we look for these grand, huge solutions which we need, but sometimes those huge, broad, sweeping solutions can almost be limiting in terms of how we, approach our day to day. And so I think just reminding ourselves to put our feet on the ground where we're at and doing whatever we can in that moment, to better our environment and our community, it is often a wonderful place to start. And again, I'm just incredibly grateful for learning those lessons in the mountains and in the ocean. And I really appreciate, Megan, the what you mentioned at the beginning of whose land we are on. That is certainly not lost on me, and I don't think it's lost on many members of our community. And so I actually, when you were reading that out loud, I go, oh wow, I have to I have to really thank Megan because if anybody hasn't read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you've like fallen asleep for the last 40 minutes, you take nothing away from this. I hope you remember to read that book, but I think that her um, Dr. Kimmerer's take on why we continue to show up and do the work is incredibly valuable, and that even a wounded world is feeding us, even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy, and that I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift. Before I answer any questions, I want to bring us all the way back to the very beginning when I asked you to think of that place that brings you joy. And as we kind of end the evening, or we'll end the evening after questions, but think about that place in as much detail as you can. And all of us ask ourselves, what are we going to do moving forward after this evening to help protect it, help nurture it, help share it with other people, but make sure that it certainly exists for future generations. And with that, I believe that's my last slide. Yes. So I'll stop sharing and answer any questions. I went a little over time, but we still have some time left. There we go.
Thanks, Blake. That was really wonderful. I really appreciate your candor in all of this. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so Marcia says, thank you, Blake. I've always found getting outside what makes life good, sometimes just bearable. Do you find the physical exertion a part of your mental health benefits?
Yeah, I do. I do. I The only reason I'm pausing is just because there's a very fine line in that exertion. I think, you know, there is, I think when I'm in a place where there's a curiosity, like a genuine, authentic curiosity about what our minds and bodies are capable of, that seems really powerful and an expansive place to be in. I also know, particularly in managing grief and loss, that I've used physical exertion as a means of avoidance. And so I think that, yes, it is a very special place to be. It's amazing when you see your body capable of things that you never imagined. And then I also think that in some instances, being very still is just as important as that exertion, and being still in nature in particular is just as important as that exertion. Wow, what a great question. Number one, right off.
I told you she's
Wow.
amazing
Yeah.
every time. And I really appreciate that. Again, I know I said this just like 20 seconds ago, but I think your candor is so important in this because I think that yeah, I really appreciate your response. I guess is what I'm saying. Like I just think it's very thoughtful. And I think, it you can get lost in the, oh, if I'm supposed to be outdoors and being active and I'm supposed to be active, but I just like don't feel like it. Like it just feels like too much, whether it's you're like me and you can't seem to not be sick this winter or whatever it is, right? But
Yes.
then it's like just the like being out there and being still also has this whole other set of benefits. And I think, yeah, to kind of be honest with ourselves also about how the kind of exertion as a way of losing oneself. I that's
Mhm.
it's it's all really helpful to think about. Thank you. Yeah. Other other questions. All right, so we have another question in the chat. Um, so Tom says, I recall at the beginning of the pandemic, you gave a great talk about the mental aspects of avalanche awareness for an ESAW Zoom session. Anything to say about AVI conditions on Mount Washington or Black Dyke on Cannon this week?
Oh, oh, so much to say. Um, it changed really, this last wind event um changed things really dramatically. I actually, after this, prep for a guides meeting for the Backcountry Ski Festival tomorrow, and I essentially have to cross out everything I had written because it's no longer true. But we've had for most of the winter a really complex snowpack with, quite frankly, I think it's been about 9, 10 years, 8 or 9 years since we had a persistent weak layer in our snowpack, and that was forecasted for a couple weeks. At one point, we're seeing these beautiful, almost West Coast style facets. I realize I'm rambling right now. I'll answer your question. In the here and now, that huge wind event really healed so much. And by healed, I mean it is pretty firm in most places right now. So upper layer instabilities are certainly still a huge concern. But that wind event really knocked down, and the snow that happened before it flushed out a lot of those instabilities that we've been seeing. They've been kind of like lingering for almost the last month. So I'd say as we move forward, I didn't dig everywhere today, so I don't want to speak for every aspect and elevation. But just kind of hearing from other folks and other professionals around, it seems that we're all in pretty close agreement that, um, those deeper layers and deeper instabilities have tended to heal, and now we're really dealing with whatever comes next, whatever snow falls on top of this remaining snow, which is a pretty deep snowpack, which is an incredibly long-winded way of saying it's pretty fun skiing right now. And I would watch out for small pockets of soft wind slab. There was more soft snow up high today than I expected. I really thought that wind event was just going to move everything into basically Highway 16 or Route 16. I didn't expect to find much snow up high, and yeah, there was some enjoyable skiing to be had. Hope that helps.
Great. We can come for like, big picture, how to approach, mental health and like really specific avalanche advice. This is great. We're getting all big scale here.
I would say as a mindset, if that's part, more of like, I would definitely say it was really interesting to hear everybody going up the hill today. And sorry to interrupt, Megan, but I'd
No,
say like curiosity was the theme. Like everybody was really curious about this pretty dramatic change. And so I know that's going to be a big part of what we talk about tomorrow, is just being curious and being open, because yes, some of those deeper instabilities have healed, but it doesn't mean that we're at like full send do whatever, ski, climb wherever you want. So yeah, a curious mindset. Yeah. But enthusiastic one. Yeah.
So here's another, we're into another granular question here. Have you ever skied or guided in the Chick Chocks of Gas?
Ooh. I have skied there. Yes, it is incredible. It's a long drive. Speeding tickets are heavy. I forewarn you. They really mean it, the speed limits. But it's worth it. It is, yeah, it's been a few years, but the way the hills, like the way they roll almost feels like parts of Colorado. And certainly they're having a great snow year right now. But what I really appreciated, what we have a hard time around here doing is, as I'm sure many of you know, like by the time you get up into many of our ravines, you've just committed so much of your day to get there. And the trick shocks, if you plan out your trip well, you can bounce from trailhead to trailhead relatively quickly. And even at those trailheads, you have a lot of different options to go ski. So I'd say the access felt in some places of the Chick Shocks, not all, but yeah, some places felt almost like being on the West Coast where you could just, get out of the vehicle and put your skis on and you could be skiing within minutes, which was kind of incredible. Yeah. And obviously there's more remote parts of that range as well, but yeah, pretty special place.
The person who asked the question added a message that said, I skied there in May with 5 foot of base still left. So,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't say what year, but at some point there was still,
Believe it. There you go.
yeah.
Yeah. They get a lot of snow up there. Yeah. Yeah. And their avalanche center does an incredible job. So make sure you, oh,
Oh
20. Oh,
yeah, 20
yeah.
years ago. Yeah. Well, we'll expect a full report in June of what it was like this May then.
I know. I bet. Yeah. I bet it's close.